You are welcome to the third episode of the series Consciousness and Personal Fulfillment. As a young boy, I grew up with the unshakable sense that there was something within me that possessed vitality superior to my physical aspect. It was something familiar yet elusive. It never occurred to me then that many of us puzzle over who or what we are as human beings, albeit in a non-committal, meandering manner. As I indicated earlier, it was a series of searing experiences that eventually disposed me to profound illumination. The searing experiences caused me confounding inner turmoil, the details of which I'll spare you here. If you're interested to look into those details, you may obtain yourself a copy of the ebook Consciousness, Your Voice. I'll be glad to be supported in that regard. However, let me say this again. The gruesome experiences that I referred to resulted in the fracture of my inner fabric, which amplified the fractious nature of the psyche. Having the psyche fractured cast the various inner features in sharp relief. Then, through self-observation, I came to profound illumination regarding the shared human essence, that which renders you and me human beings. From what I have just said, let me underline two issues. First, a person or an individual does not have to go through a harrowing or gruesome experience to grasp the human essence, which is consciousness. All you need is to look and pay attention to yourself, because your essence is intrinsically you. Your essence is what you really are. Second, let me be explicit regarding what I mean by profound illumination. Coming to grips with consciousness renders one's interiority as clear as the light of day. The various inner features, including the mind and your exertions, as well as the underlying psychological processes, become well defined. They become distinct, so to speak, in the mind's eye. By that, you are empowered to direct and control those inner features and psycho processes in a conscious, deliberate, and cohesive manner. So, coming to grips with consciousness has real life implications. As the image shown at the start of this episode illustrates, you are indeed your voice. The human essence speaks for itself. Unfortunately, because we are mostly blind to who we are, even when we ask ourselves, who am I? We barely realize that the answer lies in coming to grips with the self-same inquiring voice. That voice is consciousness. Let me proceed by putting to you the definition of consciousness. Consciousness is voice knowing in and of itself that imbues the human form to facilitate sentience, in which the volition itself is participant and observer. Consciousness is voice knowing in and of itself that imbues the human form to facilitate sentience, in which the volition itself is participant and observer. Let me restate the definition of consciousness I have just rendered above. Consciousness is voice that is knowing in and of itself, and that voice imbues the human form to enable sensory perception in which the volition itself, that is voice, is participant and observer. That simple definition, I should say, is loaded with meaning. In this episode, we shall quickly expound upon that definition and then briefly consider what it portends, what it foreshadows. When a person says I, it denotes the same voice or volition referred to in the definition. Accordingly, I is equal to self. When the individual states I am or myself, what does it mean? It implies that they are seized of something. They are aware of something that they are making reference to. I am myself. And so it ideally means, mark that, it ideally means that the individual is cognizant of his core, which makes out as knowing in and of itself. In other words, the person will be acutely aware that his essence sees and hears itself, and that by such inherent discernment or insight, the volition is not only critical of itself, but also distinguishes itself from all other actualities, experiences, and knowledge. Analogically, consciousness seeing itself could be likened to a person in front of a mirror, observing his image and the reflections of whatever he is doing. Invariably, the person's gaze moves back and forth from his mirror image to himself. Also, consciousness hears itself in a manner akin to one hearing his own physical voice and thoughts before or without verbalizing those thoughts or words. From the foregoing, I hope you realize that the voice we are shedding light upon here isn't the physical or audible voice that manifests from the vocal cords in your throat. We are considering the essential voice that informs your thoughts and words even without you verbalizing them. That voice is your consciousness. That voice, as the embodiment of human discernment or human intelligence, does not require the aid or existence of any other actuality or object, such as a mirror or the body's sensory apparatus, for it to see or hear itself. Consciousness purely reflects upon itself. That is why, even when a person is silent, that individual hears his voice. And that's why a deaf person hears his thoughts, and it explains why a blind person sees or perceives his inner inclinations. So it is crucial to take note that because consciousness is knowing in and of itself, the essential human voice is existent. That is, it exists prior to sentience or sensory perception and whatever raciocination or thought processes that accompany such sensory perception. That voice of volition, to which the human body lends form, constitutes being. We have observed that the voice I is equal to self. We have also noted that when a person says I am, it denotes cognizance of his core as knowing in and of itself. In that case, consciousness equals I. I is self. And when I say I am, I would, as it were, be referring to self. So, consciousness is equal to I, is equal to self, is equal to I am. In that case, it is entirely adequate to enunciate one's essential identity by simply stating, I am. The 17th century French thinker, scientist, and mathematician René Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, or I think, therefore I exist. To aver, as he did, that I think, therefore I am, or I think, therefore I exist, is the wrong way around. Man's essence, or being, that is, what we intrinsically are as human beings, precedes and transcends thought. The existence of consciousness cannot be predicated on any manner of reason, the supposition of which would set the cart before the horse. And so Descartes fell short of visualizing with demonstrable clarity the root and essence of personal identity, and as such he tottered with regard to seizing the foundation of human knowledge and understanding. Man's essence is the basis of human understanding, and it is, so to speak, the canvas upon which all other human experiences and knowledge form. A person comes to grips with this core by surmounting the spell of blindness to it. That is, one achieves self-awareness by his consciousness coming to see and hear itself. I refer to that development as consciousness intuiting itself. Consciousness intuiting itself does not only engender inner illumination or the light within, it also triggers the wrestle to free one's interiority from the mental conditioning and psychological gags that undermine wholesome self-direction. In other words, by you coming to grips with your core, you are empowered to exert yourself fully awake to your interiority, or in full cognizance of the mental and psychological processes involved. In that way, you would manage the inner inclinations consciously and deliberately. As it is, consciousness does not appeal to any form of reason or ratiocination or any materiality for it to see and hear itself or validate its existence. I intuits itself, pure and simple. I basically am, that is, I am. I, or any other human being for that matter, do not exist just because we happen to think or reason. And on a light-hearted note, even birds and dogs think. Likewise, stones exist, but that doesn't imply that stones also think. Seriously though, what sets man apart in this matter is the capacity of his essence to reflect upon itself. Consciousness reflecting upon itself illuminates the psyche and the cognitive function, which grants a person direct access and control over these inner features. Now, there is a world of difference between creatures that are simply conscious and then human beings whose consciousness reflects upon itself. That is amply considered in one of the upcoming episodes. Briefly, however, conscious is devoid of the psychological depth that pertains to the human essence reflecting upon itself. The outlook afforded by conscious is predominantly that of sensory perception and the associated simple, if not extrinsic, forms of reason that for the most part service sensual or bodily inclinations. Hence, when a person leads an existence that is basically conscious, it implies that the individual is largely in the dark regarding the psyche, lacking explicit awareness of how it functions or what role it performs. Now, because of being in the dark regarding the psyche, we can make all manner of assertions about ourselves based on any mental or psychological tendencies. We've observed that Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." Someone called Simone Weil said, "I can, therefore I am." I also seem to recall that someone has declared, "So, I think, therefore I'm dangerous." However, I should put it to you that Descartes too, René Descartes, realized that man exhibited other inner inclinations or attributes of which he, Descartes, wasn't as assured of as to think. We may, at this juncture, pose this question. If man can assert, "I am," as we've observed, doesn't that imply that he is a god? Yes, indeed. Man is a god. He is a fallen god, though, as we shall consider in another upcoming episode. Man's consciousness is tainted by the spell of atrophy, which inclines to repress or shut it down. That weakens the power of consciousness to intuit itself. Consequently, the individual's interiority is rendered opaque to himself. That inner circumstance explains why, when you ask yourself, "Who am I?" you barely realize that the answer lies in coming to grips with the self-same inquiring voice. And because man's consciousness is caught up in the aforesaid spell of atrophy, its propensity to self-criticize or self-interrogate is dampened. And so man's natural rational inclination or straight thinking, along with its inbuilt guiding standard of right and wrong, which is moral sensibility, are compromised. By and large, the said atrophy undermines conscientious or wholesome self-direction, chips away at the steadiness of the human psyche, and renders individuals open to a range of mental health challenges. Pristine or unadulterated consciousness is the essence of man's freedom. Our inner growth is inclination toward that freedom. As one surmounts blindness to self or pares down any associated mental conditioning or psychological gags, the greater his autonomy with respect to rational exertion and moral sensibility. Engaging moral sensibility upholds the individual's inner sanctity, which essentially is the hygiene or cleanliness of consciousness. Observance of that hygiene ensures not only the integrality or wholeness of one's essence, but its vitality as well. Rational exertion in concert with moral sensibility underlie wholesome self-direction. The higher one's inner freedom, the higher his sense of personal sanctity. And a high sense of personal sanctity naturally uplifts our sense of kinship as human beings. It follows that the individual with a proper or authentic sense of personal sanctity extends that reverence to others. To revere or respect a fellow human being is to uphold their sanctity. A person attuned to his essential element, or consciousness for that matter, is invariably imbued with goodwill and empathy or fellow feeling for other people. In addition to granting us a proper grasp of our semblance or kinship as human beings. Inner freedom disposes us to appreciate each person's individuality or autonomy. The individual human is unlike any other person. Each persona is unique. One's voice differs from all other human voices. Whereas we may hear or record the sound of one's physical voice, only the individual can hear and grasp the root of what becomes exteriorly audible. Only the individual can come to grips with his core that underlies the sanctity and autonomy of the individual. Let me ask you to particularly ponder whether there is something more intimate to you than your voice. And you know, I don't mean the audible or physical voice, but rather the human core we are considering here. Ponder the matter, and I dare say you will not find anything more intimate to your existence than your voice. Then you realize that up till now you have taken for granted who or what you intrinsically are. We have noted that man's voice constitutes his core. That voice bears neither color nor ethnicity or so-called race. Still, voice does not possess mass or weight. And while the verbalization or sound that issues from the voice box in your throat may have a particular pitch or reach, the essential human voice cannot be measured in terms of length, width, or depth. Therefore, devoid of any measurable or quantifiable extent, voice has no dimensions. Man's voice is dimensionless. As to where the human voice is not merely sound. When, for instance, in a conversation, a person says, "I see," it implies that he perceives something and is awake to or observing the processes of perception and the associated reason or thought. Hence, man's essential voice is a singularity, able to see, hear, think, and verbalize experiences all at once. With our ability to see, hear, and think encapsulated in a dimensionless volition that, so to speak, sensibly exerts and reigns it itself, man's consciousness is simply magical. It engages and hears its reflections before verbalizing or willing such into exteriorly audible voice, and it is as weird as a single hand clapping on its own. Therefore, it should not be surprising that some ancient mystics and contemporary writers such as Deepak Chopra make mention of the wizard within, the wizard within us. Consciousness isn't a vestige of some bygone mystical age. Neither is it a thing of some hazy, distant spiritual future. Consciousness is a distinct volition that underpins and permeates the day-to-day living of each person, and it exists regardless of whether one is oblivious to the fact that he or she is principally such volition. Overall, the appreciation of consciousness by you and I would effectively challenge settled assumptions and prevailing mindsets across the board. Particularly, it would become plain that consciousness as a dimensionless actuality is not bounded or circumscribed by the fashionable but misleading perception of the scientific era, which inclines to view human experience, including man's mental and psychological processes, in purely material terms. Consciousness is actuality distinct from matter. Its existence is neither enabled by nor dependent upon material reality. Consciousness is not only as self-evident as matter, it transcends material reality. Moreover, while matter, for example, a stone, exhibits a dumb existence, lacking in sentience and sensibility and unable to speak for itself, consciousness vouches for itself. That is to say, the human essence voices its existence, its characteristics and aspirations. What is more, the attributes or secrets of material reality are discerned by consciousness. Therefore, to seek to grasp consciousness via the material lens reflects not just eternal outlook vis-a-vis the perceptible spectrum or layered nature of reality, but also a skewed consideration of what man essentially is. Nevertheless, man is consciousness embodied. That is, the human essence dressed in matter, or more precisely, the flesh. Consciousness dressed in the human form or body is what constitutes the soul. That embodiment renders man earthbound, held down to the dimensions of space and time, which, as it were, are quantifiable. Now, although man's physical form situates him in the dimensions of space and time, the dimensionless quality of consciousness implies that the essential human volition transcends the bounds of the aforementioned quantifiable dimensions. We have observed what consciousness is, and that the soul is consciousness embodied, consciousness dressed in the human form. In the next episode, we shall look at what the mind is and how it relates to consciousness. Until then, thank you for listening. Bye-bye.